short straw to sum up legal issues for large solar in 20 minutes. How on earth do you do that? My choice could be to skate thinly over the surface for 20 minutes. I'm very happy to do that if that's what you'd like me to do. But I've gone for a kind of a hybrid model. I'll skate for the first 8 or 10 minutes, if that's all right, going over some of the issues which are causing consternation in the industry, certainly engagement and discussion. And then maybe just slow down a bit and dig more deeply into the PPA, contracts for difference, market issues. Because that is where we see, and I think the industry sees, a major challenge, which is with us now, a great opportunity, a very limited window of opportunity to influence that debate with DEC and the Minister and the Secretary of State before it becomes enshrined. It's no good moaning about it in 6 months' time. There is a very limited opportunity to influence an incredibly important debate for the industry. I did a straw poll. The way I thought I'd do this is do a straw poll of my solar team and go around the various legal disciplines and restrict them very strictly to 3 points that they'd like me to put forward in sort of 2 or 3 minutes per slide. Well, as you can see, the property department completely failed and came up with 5 points, so my apologies on behalf of them. These are the things that are on their key issues list at the moment. I wonder if it accords with yours. The interesting thing as we go through, you'll probably come out, if I asked you to do the same, you'll probably come out with a different list. Hopefully there will be some points of overlap. Assignment ability, terribly boring clause at the end of an agreement. But unless you get your assignment rights right in a lease, then you as developer, you as owner of the project, could find further down the line that when you come to assign into a slightly different vehicle that you set up, because the funder required a slightly different ownership model or whatever, then actually you can't do it. Your clause isn't flexible and wide enough, and you've got to go back to the landowner for consent. So things to watch there, definition of assignment to group company. What do you mean by group company? Assignment to an affiliate. How do you define an affiliate? Are you just related to that company? Is it 30% interest, 40, 20, or whatever? Focusing on that, giving the maximum flexibility, so you don't have to go back to the landowner to ask for consent later. Agricultural tenancies, if you're unfortunate to have one on your site, then obviously get onto it quickly. They're difficult. They take time, and in some cases, the very worst sort, you actually need to show grounds for terminating those so that you can move forward with a project. It will be a catastrophe to find that you discovered this late on in the process, the very first thing, but you would need to identify if they exist. Good old direct agreements. You'll find that it's a kind of repeating theme in this brief talk. Leases have had sort of direct agreement light clauses for many years, forfeiture step-in right clauses for a funder to come in and to take over the project. But increasingly, I think funders are saying, no, that's just not good enough for us. Either we want a separate agreement. Sometimes you can get away with a side letter, perhaps, setting out the principles of step-in for a funder, but much more typically now, a funder will insist upon the ability to require the landlord to give a direct agreement, enabling the funder to step in and to step out of a project. There are different ways of approaching that. You either attach the form of agreement and say, this is what you, landlord, will sign up when the moment comes. You summarise the rights, perhaps, if you just want to go for a light clause, or you say that the funder's standard form, or possibly even the funder's reasonable form, will be entered into. But a key point, miss that, and you've got another renegotiation with a landowner at a very sensitive stage. Neighbouring land use, tricky one. For obvious reasons, if you've got a landowner that retains land around your solar park, it's quite a good idea to make sure that that landowner doesn't do things which could prejudice the project. That can take a variety of forms. The obvious one is growing the leandii on the boundary, or building a great big office block next door. Not a great thing for a solar park. Less obvious would be things like shooting rights, not terribly sensible near a solar park. Spreading, spraying, spreading manure. Just thinking outside the box, what could affect my project? An industry next door that is terribly dusty. box. Do we need additional protection to ensure that our project is insulated from those sort of risks? Again, a little bit further, a little bit more tenuous perhaps, but would it hit my project if there was a huge other power station put next door, whether it be solar or otherwise? Would it put strain on the grid? It may not be an issue, but if the answer to that question is, yeah, we'd be concerned about that, it may be that you should be seeking some form of assurance that the landlord would not do that and covenant not to do it for the duration of the project. A regulatory point, a bit nasty, but certainly if you've got a FIT project which has been consented, and perhaps it's been consented at a high level, maybe 5 megawatts with a high feed-in tariff level in the past, then there is potentially a bit of an issue when you put one right next door to it. You certainly don't want that to be regarded as an extension of that site to take it above the 5 megawatt limit and therefore potentially to affect its original accreditation. So neighbouring land use can be important. Bit of a technical point, but if the answer to any of those probing questions is yes, we would be concerned, that would be something to feed into the lease. And finally, on property contamination risk, quite unusual is that why should solar be concerned with contamination risk? I quote, and I hesitate to quote the Minister from this morning, a little bit controversial, brownfield should always be the preferred option. That didn't go down terribly well, I sensed in the room, but that may be the direction of travel, perhaps, towards previously used property. As that direction of travel comes through the system, as we do perhaps less greenfields, so the contamination risk side is going to be increasingly important. A landlord, normally, when granting a 25-year lease, will try and offload contamination risk onto the tenant, and certainly would in a sale. The tenant similarly says, it's not my problem, what's happened before, I don't want to take that risk. Compaction, penetration, all important issues as the tenant goes on and does its stuff in a solar project. If it creates a pathway from that source, from previously existing contamination there, creates a pathway down to perhaps a high groundwater table, there could be a potential issue there. So we sense that is going to become more and more important. I think the feedback from my planning colleagues, I think it is generally favourable, is that they're damn sight easy to do the wind farms. And they are faster, a lot faster. A number of you, if you are involved in the wider renewables industry, will have been tied up in wind farm applications and appeals for years and years. At least the timescales we are talking about now are shorter, and that must be welcome. Planning conditions, again contrasting with wind, noise, height, radar, bats, birds, there may be elements of those in a solar application, but they're likely to be less sensitive. I think one feature that came out strongly in my straw poll was ecology, archaeology reports and surveys. I think the point was made this morning by Rob, I think, that if you do have to do a new survey, don't leave it to the last minute. There are some things you just cannot accelerate, and therefore the timing of those ecology surveys is really rather important. It might be a huge expense item, but if all other aspects of the project are waiting for that to be done, they actually become a time-critical item. Finance. How do I sum up finance in a couple of minutes? I picked up a rather splendid brochure, well done Schneider, from reception to pick one up if you haven't got it, and it starts with bankable solar solutions. It's interesting, isn't it? Not solar solutions that work, not solar solutions that last, that live forever, or are cheap, or good value, or whatever. It's the word they started with, bankable. Financeability, it's a rather horrible word, isn't it? But there's been an awful lot of focus on that, quite rightly, today. Without the finance, these things are not going to get away. What is bankable? What is financeable? Well, I suppose there isn't a rule book. You can open that book. Actually, is being changed week by week as banks, perhaps other funders, become more comfortable or less comfortable with certain aspects. So one has to keep up to know the latest positions in terms of financeability. What's very clear, though, is that the temptation, perhaps early on in a project, to cut corners and to make a fudge of something is going to come back to haunt. If you don't address the difficult point with, say, the landlord up front, that direct agreement point, for instance, we'll sort it out later. It's going to come back to haunt you. The bank isn't going to miss it, and when you go back to the landlord, then there's potentially a bit of a project ransom script there, which is going to be much more painful to resolve then than early on in the project. Financier appetite. You all have different experiences. There'll be plenty of you in this room who've done the banking rounds and have got utterly frustrated by it. I've had plenty of discussions with people who are incredibly frustrated and really rather angry, I have to say. And I feel very, very sorry for them. The appetite, however, and this is a genuine observation across a number of projects, we sense the appetite is probably stronger than it's ever been for a whole variety of reasons. I suppose scale. Ray shared with us, the progress from kilowatt. 3 years ago we were talking about kilowatts. The Michael Eavis, was it 200 kilowatts or the biggest one in the country? It's how we move forward. It doesn't take a genius to realise that when you go from kilowatts to megawatts and then start talking gigawatts, and the prediction is 25, 30 gigawatts, then the biggest funders are potentially involved. There's a transaction cost, there's a minimum level at which many funders will only show interest beyond that threshold. So the solar scale that we've achieved in this country is I think one of the reasons why we're now seeing real interest, real activity throughout the finance community. The low technology risk, having been in charge of renewables for the last 20 or so years, technology risk is a real pain. And you can't get past the first post with many funders with certain technologies. It's a fact. Some will just not be able to support wave or tidal or biomass or waste to energy, whatever it might be. Technology risk comes through very strongly. With solar, I don't think I've actually heard technology risk raised as an issue at all, which is fantastic to have that off the agenda. That must help with financing discussions. It's been certainly very helpful for us in the UK that Europe has a well-trodden solar industry. That helped in the early years, 2 or 3 years ago. That was the thing that really brought the interest and the appetite through from European banks. I think we've created our own now. We don't have to rely upon what happened in Italy, Germany, Spain. But in the early days, that was a key factor. Innovation, there's an awful lot going on. Nick referred to the retail investors. Who would have thought that a few years ago? Crowdfunding, another source of finance. But there's real innovation happening in the bond market. Who would have thought that we'd be seeing, Angus referred to it this morning, who would have thought we would have been seeing a big bond issue from the capital markets being fed into solar? Various challenges come out of that, but people thinking outside the box, wanting to think outside the box. And that's really exciting. It makes direct agreements interesting, because when you have a bond issue, for instance, the usual idea on a direct agreement is that you say to your counterparty, don't worry, this direct agreement is for your benefit, because the bank will step in, and the bank is big and it has lots of money. Unfortunately, with bond issue, that's not quite the same proposition. Because when you've got your bond money, there isn't actually a series of further checks available to the project. It's project-specific recourse once that bond has come in, which makes the direct agreement negotiation rather different and perhaps quite difficult. What's in it for me, says the counterparty. Construction O&M, I'll quickly brush over this because I've been given a little warning. How much do I have? 5 minutes, I'll definitely brush over this. Catch me afterwards if you'd like to discuss anything about construction O&M. But I will move forward quickly now to power purchase agreements. A very quick history. This is not really done for nostalgia. It's much more for, I suppose, the lessons of the past. Anybody remember NFPA and NOFO contracts? Does that ring a bell with anybody? A few grey hairs or with very little hair? These were available in the 90s, and they were very useful. They were contracts, they were government contracts, which enabled projects like landfill gas and wind to happen and to work. They came in at 11p. We got 11 pence a kilowatt hour in 1991 with the very first NOFA contracts. Those were key. They then deteriorated in terms of their value and importance, but they were a contract, and they took away regulatory risk. And contracts for difference, hopefully, will bring in the best of that system. Levy exemption certificates, remember them coming in 2001, still an important part of a renewables project, including solar. ROCs arrived in 2002, completely transformed the market. In the early days, the off-takers didn't want power, they just wanted ROCs. They had a fantastic appetite for it. We then had a series of, in 2002, 3, 4, 5, series of informal auctions on a very competitive basis when the big six were very keen to buy these new products called ROCs because of their obligation, under the renewables obligation. What's happened today then? To call it a market in longer term renewables PPAs is an overstatement. I don't think there is a market. There are one or two off-takers who, if you're lucky when you ring them up, they still have an appetite to buy on a long-term basis, not short-term. There's a good, vibrant short-term market. And if you're looking at project finance PPAs on a more than, say, 8, 10, up to 15-year period, there are one or two off-takers who are still playing. Their appetite may change on a daily basis. They may fill out their book and simply not have the ability to write those contracts anymore. I'm sure you're aware of the usual suspects. Some come, some go. But what we do not have is a vibrant market. Off-taker ROC appetite is certainly diminished. Traditional off-takers are less active. The big six, they're not as active. And we're looking at much shorter terms now. Financial requirements for PPAs, of course, have not diminished. Covenant strength of off-takers is key. Term, well, it needs to match the term of the debt. So anything under the term of the debt will not be acceptable. There are a number of other requirements like floor price, very important imbalance risk, always with off-taker. There's a series of rather sad reasons why there's a margin, the independent generator loses margin in the PPA market at the moment. I could trawl through them if I had time. Very happy to do so afterwards. The last one there, probably one of the most important features, balancing costs. The opacity in terms of what will happen with balancing costs going forward is one of the key reasons in the debt consultation which is happening at the moment. That's one of the key feedbacks. Balancing costs are uncertain, therefore off-takers are not giving sharp competitive prices in the market. So long-term contracts for differences. I've only got a few moments to sum it up. The principles of this hopefully are very familiar to most of you. It's a top-up system, and it ought to work very well. It's one of those contracts which, on the face of it, should be perfect. We'll have a strike price, which will be settled in the next few months for renewables and for solar. That strike price will be the price that the reference price will get topped up to. The reference price, and this is the rub, the reference price is the price which one is deemed to get in the market. It will be calculated on a day-ahead basis, and the problem that independent generators have is that reference price is not something you will actually be able to achieve in the market. You can't achieve it today. There's a big margin, and that margin could be 10, 15, 20% as to what the actual reference price is. Top up to strike price will be from not what you actually get in the market, but what you're deemed to get. And that's the key. You won't receive the strike price. So when you read the strike price, you'll think, oh, that's a good figure. You won't get it under the current system. And that is a major challenge. You will be topped up from a deemed market price that you, as an independent generator, will not be able to achieve. Many alternatives addressing that problem are being run through. An increase in the strike price, not terribly popular, because it'll be very costly to the consumer and might benefit off-takers, certainly the vertically integrated off-takers, rather too much. Squeeze independent generators out of the market, I've heard that, but I'm certainly not going into that. a disaster if that was to happen. Balancing costs, all kinds of proposals around that. Indexing, E.ON have come through with an interesting proposal there. Capping and flooring, sharing, banding. There's a de minimis proposal to ignore anything below a certain megawatt hours limit. It's all being churned through. And there's a green power auction market. Are people familiar with the green power auction market proposals? Because in just 60 seconds I'll sum it up for people if that's okay. This is using the good old NFPA that I referred to earlier to implement a 6-month rolling auction procedure through which the power from a site, all the power from a site would be sold. And the key here, this is a proposal from RES, the key here is that the specific site auction price would be the reference price for the purpose of the top-up. If the default is set at 0, if the auction didn't clear, then there'll be top-up from 0. That is the absolute key, the golden rule in GPAM, as it's called. Just a query with it. It's not necessarily going to be taken on. DECA are pondering, but what will be the attitude of financiers to, rather than one fantastic PPA lasting for 15 years, to 30 6-monthly PPAs with off-takers that are not known at the outset of a project. That to me sounds like quite a conceptual challenge. And finally, various other hot topics under CFD. I'm going to skip down to the last bullet point, and that's just the treatment of private wires. We've heard from previous two speakers how important private wire projects are to commerciality of projects. If you can flow the majority of your power into a next door plant, Chorus or whatever, you will make a good return subject to the strength of the counterparty. There are very important PPAs being written on that basis, and they either make or break the economics of many projects. It's a great way of sharing the benefit. Being a private wire, you don't have grid costs, or at least not the same sort of grid costs, use of system charges, losses, fit smear, rock smears, etc. To cope with. That benefit is split probably equally between off-taker and generator. The worry, and I suppose this is the last point of feedback to DEC, is I don't see within the current CFD consultation too much attention on the attractiveness of private wires and how they work under CFDs. And there's a real risk, I think, that they'll get lost in the background noise, that they'll be treated like any other PPA to grid, that they'll get topped up to strike price and like any other PPA, and the beauty and the additional value of private wires will get lost over the next 6 months. I'd urge you, if private wires are important to you, to make sure you have a word with Ray or with Paul, and make sure you get in your